Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Given that the Quorum of Anointed, organized in 1844 by Joseph Smith, held both men and women in that quorum, how should we understand priesthood in relation to women? Should we have priests and priestesses in a single quorum, or should they continue to be segregated if women ever hold priesthood office? We'll talk about that in a conversation with Dr. Margaret Toscano. You won't want to miss it. Check it out. Do you think it would be useful to separate priesthood office, which is male only, from this? I mean, if we could come up with another term, and I know Jonathan tried cosmological priesthood or messianic priesthood, you've used that term, or even if we could use maybe even a different term, would it be useful to separate those terms so that we don't conflate priesthood office with priesthood power, for lack of a better
word?
And
of course it's really complicated, because if you say, when women were anointed as queens and priestesses, and I think those terms, I don't like the whole, this kind of Brigham Young idea of kingdom building, where I'm going to build all these kingdoms in heaven for myself. I think the queen and priestess, I did it again. I think the queen and priestess notion that Joseph Smith develops, or that you have in the early endowment, I think it has to do again with the with sort of a spiritual and temporal aspect of priesthood. That the priestess is the sort of spiritual aspect of it. The queen is sort of the notion of organizational or governing. And, I just think queen and king can have such bad connotations that I don't think that's, it's interesting what was meant by that.
Especially in a democracy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we hope we can hold on to our democracy, right? I want to. But actually, that's an interesting tension in Mormonism, I think. You can find both in Joseph Smith, a really egalitarian. Everybody's going to have priesthood, right? Not just this few ordained people, but everybody's going to have priesthood. And at the same time, a kind of hierarchical order of the church. So I think that those are two really almost conflicting things that are really hard to balance in the church. Common consent versus just do whatever you're told, right?
Yeah.
So, but I mean, would it help? I guess. But if you think about, and I'm trying to remember, I think it used to be that, you have to remind me, Rick, when you receive the priesthood as like a deacon, do you receive the priesthood first and then you're ordained as a deacon?
Yes. Yeah. You receive the priesthood and then you're ordained to the office of whatever. Yeah.
See, and I think that that's really significant, the idea that the priesthood is separate from the office. And I think if you think about it, I would argue that, at least the way it used to be, I don't know, the structure of the temple has changed so much. So does it still bestow the fullness of the priesthood? I kind of think it can, but it's an interesting question. Again, I think they've changed it to patriarchal priesthood, not full. It used to be the fullness of the priesthood. Now it's patriarchal priesthood. But if you think about it, if you're a priestess to God, that is significant. You're a priestess. You have priesthood. It's different than just saying, I have the power of godliness. I am a priestess of God. Just like if you ordain to the priesthood, you have priesthood. I'm also a deacon or an elder or high priest or whatever. They keep changing these things. But that's significant that you have the priesthood. It's again, I feel like that was what Joseph Smith wanted. He wanted every person in the church, every man and woman, to be endowed with this messianic priesthood. And so that, because he said this, he wanted everybody to be able, and, I don't want to sound like Denver Snuffer, because I really don't agree with a lot of what he does, although I do agree with Denver's critique that we've sort of lost the sense of the importance of individual spiritual gifts because everything is subordinated to the church, right? But, I think it can go in the wrong direction too. The idea of, if you think about yourself And I have to say that this changed me. If you think of, I am a priestess of God, the power of godliness dwells in me. And even if I don't have a church office or anything else, I am part of the holy order of God, which is the order of the priesthood after the Son of God. And I think about that, what is the purpose? I mean, and even though, we didn't mention in this one, but in my last interview, I was excommunicated in the year 2000. I just celebrated the 20th anniversary. November 30th, 2000, I was excommunicated for writing about women. What?
Is celebrated the right term?
I didn't celebrate. I actually mourn every year.
Yeah.
But, you know what? I've gone through a lot. I've struggled a lot. But I still believe that I'm a priestess of God. And what does that mean to me? It means to me, I'm not part of the church, but I belong to the holy order of God. And what that means is that I try in my life to do the will of God, to use the power of godliness to do the will of God. That's what it means to be part of the holy order of God. And you don't need the church for that. You don't need the church. That's about a personal spiritual commitment that you know that God has ordained you to his priesthood and that you want to further the work of God by being compassionate and kind, by helping people wherever you can with whatever your resources are, that you try to speak truth, that you try to do whatever you can to make the world better. And I'm telling you, in the world that we live in, I don't care whether you call it priesthood or not, if you have that sense of the holy, and I love the idea that it's the holy order of God. What is it that makes it holy? The thing that makes it holy is the sense that you're working for the good of all God's children. And I would also say you're working for the good of the earth that we live on. And again, I see this as one of the most important parts of the revelation of Joseph Smith, the notion that the physical world, and it's not like you can't find this in Christianity, it is there, but I think he really reinforces it. We are caretakers of the world and we have not used it wisely. And so for me, if you feel like that you're part of the holy order of God, is that you believe in the holiness, the sanctity of all life. You believe in the sanctity of the earth, of the planets. I love DNC 88. The Spirit of Christ is in the stars and the moon and the sun and throughout the earth. And I see basically the essence of priesthood is the spirit power of God. And that we see the holiness in all life, and in we look for holiness everywhere, and we try to nurture that and sustain it and do what we can to bring about goodness and to not have a narrow-minded view of it. But I love the statement of Joseph Smith where he talks about, that Mormonism is about seeing truth in all things. And I love that statement where he says that if you want to comprehend the mind of God, if you really want to be part of the holy order, you have to look up into the highest heaven, but also be willing to look down into the darkest abyss and be willing to suffer with those. Again, we could quote the Book of Mormon, you suffer with those that are suffering. You try to bear each other's burdens. To me, all of that is the work of the priesthood. And, the thing that the church can do because of the power of an organization is that they can bring the resources together in really a united effort to do those kind of things the best way possible. And that's when the church is at its very best. Even though I have critiqued at times things that the church does, I think the church does a lot of good too. And it's at its best when it's trying to, help people, but also you have to nurture the soul as well as the body. Here we go back to that bringing together the spiritual and the physical, that, it's so important that we open our minds to see God's work everywhere. And I really sincerely believe that I believe that God loves, God, male and female, love all of their children. And they're trying in any means possible to bring about the redemption, sanctification. Those are the religious words, but really what it means is helping everybody to reach their best potential and to not abuse the earth or the resources, but to distribute things so that everybody, there's enough, as the scripture says. If we could only share, there's enough for everybody. Everybody should have food and shelter and health care, right?
Yeah.
I'm sounding like a socialist now. That's not good. Anyway, I mean, I feel really strongly about this, Rick. And for me, studying out the words of Joseph Smith has really helped me understand kind of broader meanings of priesthood and how it can work in a way that I feel is really helpful to everybody, wherever you're at, right? That you can think in terms of, and you can be an atheist, of course, and be committed to the principles of truth and justice and goodness and compassion, you know. And to me, God acknowledges, anybody whose heart is trying to work for these good things. To me, they have the Spirit of God. I mean, I believe in God, and I would like other people to. But you know what? The important thing is that we try to work for goodness and truth and those kinds of things, compassion, mercy, justice, all of and beauty. I believe in beauty too. Not just youth beauty, but the beauty of the world, of art, and all of the wonderful things that we've produced, and to not let them be overwhelmed by greed and power and destruction.
One other question I just wanted to ask you as we wrap up here, and I know we talked a little bit about this last time, but I think it's worth revisiting. We talk about priest and priestess, queen, king and queen. I know the Bible even mentions deaconesses and deacons. There's also the idea of the Supreme Court has gotten rid of the idea of separate but equal. I know we don't refer to actresses anymore. They're just actors. We try to give them the same name. And so this idea, and I know last time you mentioned you thought it was good to keep the men and the women separate, but is that separate but equal if we call them a priestess or an elderess or a high priestess, or should we call them high priests and elders and deacons and whatever?
Well, and I have, I always like things that are nuanced. And so I kind of try to have both. On the one hand, I think that the separate but equal has never led to equal. I mean, that's just the truth of it. Whether we're talking race or gender, it ends up often, we have same schools, but, they're not really equal, right? Which we had with race issues. So it's interesting that Joseph Smith, his actual first statement was that he was going to make the Relief Society a kingdom of priests. And then later the women, connected the language of the temple and talked about a kingdom of priestesses. But I think maybe we have to have similar language in order to have an equality. On the other hand, and I think this is what you're referring to with what I said before, I believe from my perspective, and this is Margaret's interpretation, I think that that all of the councils of the church should have both men and women. So I think there should be female apostles as well as male apostles. And I won't get into, it's interesting, maybe Joseph and Emma were joint presidents of the Quorum of the Anointed, but we get into the problem of single people, right? And I think we should be able to have single apostles, right? So that you don't have to be married to be an apostle. So I believe that you should have the Quorum of the Apostles should be both men and women. The High Council should be men and women. So I kind of want both, Rick. But I also think that there's some power in brotherhood and sisterhood. And so as I was thinking about this question of the Relief Society being a priesthood quorum, it's almost like I want to have three different kinds of structures. I want to have the central quorums of the church to be both men and women, so they all have a vote. But there's power in a women's organization where the women maybe are not intimidated by the men and they can have their own vote. So if you had the Relief Society, that they had a vote equal to the quorum of the 12 apostles now, and they don't have to vote where their husbands can see them. There's some power in that. And not only that, but there's just power. I mean, I've gone to retreats where just women are there. And, it can be really wonderful to have a women's group, right? And then, of course, I know that men, they feel brotherhood. So I think that those are real. I want both. I want both, to have men and women working together, but also the possibility of having brotherhood and sisterhood. And of course, with all the issues of, trans people and so forth, it gets more complicated. I certainly want to support equal rights for all of the LGBTQ community. On the other hand, I don't want to erase differences.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Margaret Toscano. In our next interview, you're going to notice a change of venue. I got together with Margaret a few months later after the pandemic, so we got to be in person, so that's fantastic. Margaret's going to talk about a woman that most LDS are going to be familiar with, that she believes speaks with both power and authority.
But even let me give you an example of someone like Chieko Okasaki, who I thought she was such a marvelous women's leader. Interestingly, I think she had the spirit and power and authority in abundance, right? But while she was serving in the Relief Society presidency, that gave her the opportunity to kind of spread out her spiritual gifts even more. So I think that's an example of how that can happen even with women too.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please subscribe for just $5 a month at patreon.com/gospeltangents, and you can hear the entire interview before everybody else. If you'd like to watch the entire video for just $8 a month, you can either subscribe on YouTube, Patreon, or my website, gospeltangents.com. Just click the yellow subscribe button, and I'll add you to our Gospel Tangents Insiders group so that you can see entire videos. For those interested in a PDF transcript, you can subscribe at either Patreon or on my website. For just $10 a month, I'll send you a PDF as soon as it's complete. If you'd like a copy of the paperback as well as a PDF, just sign up for $20 a month at either Patreon or my website, gospeltangents.com. Of course, you can buy individual transcripts at amazon.com and just do a search for Gospel Tangents interview, and you can see all the things that we have there. Don't forget to support Gospel Tangents with an awesome t-shirt like one of these. You can subscribe at Apple Podcasts at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents. Get our latest updates at facebook.com/gospeltangents. Also, you can get our Twitter updates at Gospel Tangents. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here we've got more of our great videos. Thanks again.